let's talk about the semi-automatic handgun. The semi-automatic handgun is so named because each time you press the trigger, it semi-automatically loads. Meaning when I press the trigger back and shoot a round out, it brings the next round up out of the magazine and into the chamber ready to go. This is different than an automatic weapon, which when you press the trigger and hold it, it will continue to fire multiple rounds and bring multiple rounds in as you're holding the trigger back. On these semi-automatics, when you press the trigger, you can hold it back as long as you want. Only one shot is going to fire on that press. You have to reset the trigger and press it again to get another shot to come out. So let's talk about the parts of a semi-automatic. Many of the parts are similar to the nomenclature of the revolver. You have the grip, the part that you hold on to. You got your back strap. And of course you have the trigger guard. In here is your trigger. You have the barrel that the bullet travels down, the tip of the barrel, referred to as the muzzle, the front sight, and then the rear sight, typically made up of two posts. And then that's kind of where it differs from the revolver. From here we have the part called the slide. This is a moving part that operates by getting compressed with this spring inside and then moving back and forth. And this allows it to make that motion of going back and picking up or retrieving a new round off the top of the magazine and bringing it into the chamber. Some other parts that are a little bit different is that obviously it has a magazine, which is what you put the ammunition into so that it has a source of ammunition. It also has an ejection port. Now this is the part where the spent casings or empty shells fly out after the bullet has been ejected out of the gun. So when you shoot a round down the barrel, then this part slides back and out of this ejection port flies the empty casing. You'll notice that the ejection port typically opens to the right side of a handgun. So if you don't want to get hit with empty shells and spent casings, you should probably stand on the left side of a shooter. Some other things that are different about this is obviously there's the magazine release button, similar to the cylinder release latch of the revolver. The difference is that most all of these push in. The magazine release button is typically located right at the bottom rear of the trigger on the left-hand side of the firearm. Now there are some other setups and configurations, but typically this is where you will find it, and typically that button presses in towards the weapon to make it operate. So to operate this, what you'll do is you'll notice with a good grip on the weapon, I can't quite reach it with my thumb. And it's not just because I have short thumbs, but most people can't reach it this way. If you have really long thumbs, it might work for you. But what you do is you just rotate your hand slightly into the grip of the weapon so that you're now able to reach it with your thumb. You press in on that magazine release button, you see it kind of pushes it out. In fact, if I press down, you'll see it pops out. Typically, that's what's going to happen. It's typically going to just pop out for you. Now, some magazine release buttons actually press down, but most all of them push in. So again, you press that button, remove the magazine. Another part to discuss is the slide stop lever. This slide stop lever here is a tiny piece, kind of hard to see. We'll see it in greater detail later. But this is the part that actually slides into this little notch in the slide and allows you to lock the slide open like so. So you just pull it back, push that little button up and ease the slide forward on it, and it locks the slide open. So how do we load a semi-automatic? Well, there's basically 3 steps to loading a semi-automatic pistol. That is, load the magazine, insert the magazine into the weapon, and chamber a round. Get one ready to fire. So let's talk about how we're going to do that. The first thing we need to do is to load the magazine. To load the magazine, we're going to use some dummy rounds here. Notice these are all hardened plastic. They're incapable of firing. They're just dummy rounds. With a magazine, you'll note that there are 2 lips, one on either side at the top of the magazine here. They move about halfway forward on the top of the magazine, and then the other half is all open with this little follower that goes underneath. What we're going to do is we're going to take the back of the bullet and we're going to line it up so that it's towards the back of the magazine where the lips are. This is always the back of the magazine where the lips are at. So what we're going to do is we're going to pinch around in our strong hand. You'll notice I pinch pretty far forward on it. I leave most of it exposed. I'm going to take the magazine, I'm going to put it right at the base of my thumb. And you're going to notice that I put this in my support hand at the base of my thumb, because what I want my support thumb to be able to do is to come down and do this motion. So if I put it too high up in here, you'll notice I can't really get in there with my thumb. So I want to put it right at the base of the thumb so that I can do this motion, because what I'm going to be doing is pushing down and pulling back with my thumb. And again, I'm going to use my support hand for this. My strong hand is going to hold on to the rounds as I put them in. So again, what I want to do is I want to take the back of the bullet and I want to face it so it's going to be at the back of the magazine. You'll notice that with these two lips, I'm going to start just in front of them. And as I pinch this bullet, I'm going to take my thumb, I'm going to push down and pull back. Notice my fingers didn't do the work. My fingers just keep it from moving side to side. That's all I'm doing with my fingers, is keeping this bullet from moving side to side. So I get it lined up, I let my thumb come down and pull it under. Now this is a lot easier performed by setting it on a flat surface such as a table or a shooting booth, but you can use your stomach in a pinch. So again, you'll notice I'm gripping way back towards the front of the bullet here with my strong finger and strong thumb, because if I grip too far back here towards the back, you'll notice it's hard for me to get my thumb there to do the work it needs to do. So I keep my fingers out of the way by putting them at the front of the bullet, letting the thumb come down. Oops, I'm going to reposition that. There, I'm going to let the thumb come down and back. So again, down and back. And that's how you get your magazine loaded. You load it to whatever capacity you want or are capable of. You can put 1 round in, you can put 5 rounds in, or you can load it as full as it'll go. Whatever works for you, it will fire the same. Now, once I've loaded my magazine, it's time for me to insert the magazine into the weapon. Now, how do I accomplish this? Well, again, I want to get my master grip on the weapon, meaning I'm gripping it with my strong hand, my fingers off the trigger on the frame of the weapon. And then you'll note I'm going to take this magazine and I'm going to slide it into the magazine well. So it's going to go into the magazine well here. And the way I'm going to do is I'm going to again make sure the back of my magazine, the part with the lips, is facing the back of the firearm, because I want my bullet pointing towards the end of the barrel, obviously. So I'm going to put the back of the magazine in towards the back of the gun, and you'll see that when I go to put it in, even if I put it at a slight angle, it kind of finds its way into that magazine well. So you put the back of the magazine to the back of the magazine well and slide it up in there. As you slide it in there, you're going to give it a tap and a tug. So a tap, tug, to make sure that magazine is seated firmly. And why do we say that? Well, a lot of times people feel like they get in there tight, they'll give it a tap and it feels like it's seated nice and tight, but then they give it the tug, and as you can see, the magazine wasn't seated firmly at all, which will cause you a malfunction if you don't have it seated in there properly. So again, you want to back of the magazine in, up, tap, tug, just to ensure that it's in there nice and firm. Now once I have my magazine in there, I still need to get around into the chamber, because as you can see, there's nothing in the chamber. It's still empty. So I'm going to put the magazine in there, tap, tug, and as you can see, that chamber is still empty. I'm going to remove the magazine so that I can demonstrate what we're about to do next. To get around into the chamber, we're going to use a technique called racking the slide. So racking the slide is going to look like this. You're going to take the meat of your support hand. You're going to put it on the support side of the back of your slide of your weapon. You'll notice a lot of them have some sort of a ridge in here for you to grip on. So again, meat of the hand comes to the support side of the weapon near the rear portion of the slide. Meat of the hand, we're going to wrap our support fingers over the top of the weapon and grip the other side of the slide. Now if you're doing this correctly, as you can see, I've got a pretty good grip on the weapon. I also should have a little space here where my finger could actually fit in there if I've got it gripped appropriately. So again, I should have some space in there, because if I grip it like this, flat with my hand, it's hard for me to really get a good grip on it and make the motion I need to make. So we're going to go meet of the hand on the support side of the weapon. We're going to wrap those fingers around. From here, what we're going to do is we're going to do a combination of a push with our strong hand while simultaneously pulling with our support hand. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to get this slide to move all the way to its rearward most position. So what we're after is to do this. That is what we're trying to accomplish, all the way to the rear. What we're trying to do is compress this spring that's found inside of here. We're compressing it all the way back to its most compressed point, so that when we let go of it, it has the full force it needs to appropriately seat around into the chamber. So again, we're going to get meat of the hand over there, wrap those fingers around. We're going to push and pull all the way to the rear, and then we are going to let go. Now, to ensure that we let go, what we tell people to do is pat yourself on the shoulder. So it goes something like this. Hey, good job. Yeah, good job. Now, why do we say pat yourself on the shoulder? Hey, good job. I know it looks a little silly, right? But there's a reason behind this. Because what happens is, by giving yourself that little pat on the shoulder, hey, good job, you forced your hand clear out of the way, ensuring that you're letting go. And we say this because oftentimes people will get their gun and they'll start off, they'll do this, letting go, and then they gradually start this. And as you can see, it gets to be less and less force being used to get that slide to pull all the way to the rear and racking it forward. So what happens is it actually creates a malfunction for people. And this is especially true of new gun owners, because they get their brand new gun and it's like their baby, right? This is their baby to them. And so they say, well, I've got to treat this really good and I don't want to hurt my baby. So I'm going to ease it forward. That doesn't work though, because the problem is, what they don't realize, each time they fire this weapon, what's happening is they press the trigger, boom, a bullet comes out and the slide does this. That's what it does each time a round is fired, because that is how the spring compresses all the way to the rear and how it lifts the next round off the magazine and inserts it into the chamber. For a visual of this, be sure to download the Flash Player file that shows the operation of a semi-automatic pistol. It allows you to see the internal operations as well. So again, once we've taken our magazine, we've inserted it into the weapon, tap, tug, we are now ready to rack the slide to get a round into the chamber. Good job. And from here you can see that I now have a round in the chamber ready to go. Now we talked about how to rack the slide to properly chamber a round. But what happens if the slide happens to be like this? As many of you may know, when you fire a semi-automatic until it runs dry, typically the slide will lock open. So if the slide is locked open, people will sometimes take their magazine, they get it loaded up, they insert it into the weapon, tap, tug, and then they go, how do I get a round chambered from here? Well, what many people do, and they think looks really cool, is to just slap this little slide stop button. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the appropriate thing to do is to take the meat of your hand on one side of the slide, fingers on the other, gap in there, pull it all the way to the rear, and let go. Just like you would if the slide was already closed. You'll notice that got me a round into the chamber. So let's eject this round here and talk about why we don't want to use the slide stop button as the way to close that slide and chamber a round. There's a few reasons for this. Number one, let's think about if you're using this as a self-defense tool. If your firearm is a self-defense tool, you're under stress, you need to hurry up and reload it, the slide is locked open, and you want to hit this slide stop button. Does it work? Well, sure, you can do that, that'll work. But what are some physiological reactions that happen when we're under stress? Well, one, we sweat, right? So do you think it's going to be real easy to take this little tiny metal slide stop lever button and have sweat on your thumb and independently do that with a sweaty thumb? Well, it's probably a little trickier, right? But now let's think about another physiological reaction. When we get under stress, we oftentimes move from fine motor skills, where each of my fingers can move and operate independently of one another, to gross motor skills, where my fingers are all operating as a whole hand unit and unable to operate independently of one another. So now let's say I've got my whole hand gripping this weapon, and I'm stressed out, and it's a whole hand motion gripping the weapon, so it's hard for me to move my thumb independently, and it's sweaty, and I'm shaking, and I've got this little tiny metal slide stop lever. How easy do you think it's going to be to get that to operate under stress? And that's just one reason why we suggest not using that slide stop lever. Here's the second one, is we talk about how when we're trying to get the slide all the way to the rear, because we're trying to do what? We're trying to compress this spring, because getting the spring compressed all the way to the rear allows it to have the proper force needed to chamber around, correct? Well, is my slide all the way to the rear right now? Apparently not. So you see, we don't even have the slide all the way to the rear or that spring fully compressed when it's in this locked open state. Therefore, you can actually create a malfunction for yourself by using this slide stop button. Now, it doesn't happen every time. About 80 to 85% of the time, this slide stop button will work fine. It will get the round chambered. But I'm a man of percentages, and I like something a little closer to 100, like 99.9. So if I know that using this slide stop lever is going to have about a 15 to 20% failure rate for me, that might not be the option I want to go with. So again, we strongly suggest not using this slide stop lever as the way to chamber a round. We suggest using the full-on racking of the slide, patting yourself on the shoulder and telling yourself what a good job you did. Now, the third reason why we suggest not using this slide stop button is because we believe that it's important when you're handling a firearm to be doing things the way you've trained. Because it's very important to train the way you intend to do things at all times. If you start having to think about how you're doing things, it leaves some room for inconsistency and error. And it also forces you to take even a split second longer to think about what you're going to do. And we notice this a lot of times with people that are shooting. They'll have the gun in this position, they'll put a new magazine in, they go, oh yeah, that's right, I need to rack the slide. Good job. And they'll do it. But then they'll get it in this position and they'll go, ooh, shoot, now do I rack the slide here? Do I use the, I can't remember which way I do it. And they start to think about it. We want everything that you learn to be something that you default to as a habit. From now on, we want you, just like as you practice keeping your finger off the trigger, that should become a habit to you. We want every other motion that you're doing with a gun to become a habit, so that it becomes something that you just immediately resort to rather than having to think about. So again, if we do it this way, whether the slide is open or closed, we have now allowed ourselves to not have to think about it and to do it consistently every time. Okay, so we talked about all the steps of loading the semi-automatic. So we've got our magazine loaded. We've inserted it. Tap, tug. We've racked the slide. Good job. We got everything all ready to go. We now have one in the chamber. How do we unload the semi-automatic? I know, you go to the range and you shoot them all out, right? That's one way. But let's say you're at home, you've got the gun loaded for self-defense purposes, but you decide you need to clean the weapon. How do you safely unload this firearm? Well, we're going to teach you the 6 steps to unloading a semi-automatic. The 6 steps are to remove the magazine, rack the slide to eject a round from the chamber, rack the slide 3 more times, lock the slide open to the rear, do a visual inspection, and then do a physical inspection. Now we're going to break each one of those down for you, so you don't have to remember them just yet. We're going to talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So step 1 is to remove the magazine. Why do we want to remove the magazine? Well, as we press this magazine release button, pop the magazine out, we're now removing the source of ammunition, right? So now we've gotten a bulk of the rounds out of there. So we've removed the source of the ammunition. Step 2, we're going to rack this slide to eject the one that's in the chamber out, because as you may recall, we still have one in the chamber. And this is where people get themselves in trouble with semi-automatics sometimes. They don't realize that just because the magazine is taken out does not mean the gun is unloaded. As you can see here, there's still one in the chamber capable of firing. If it were a real round, it would be capable of firing right now. So I've removed the magazine. Step 2 is to rack the slide to remove this round from the chamber. So I'm going to do a proper racking, and I've now removed the round that was in the chamber. Now we say rack it 3 more times. Why do we rack it 3 more times? I mean, we got it out of the chamber, right? Well, we did. And we do this just as a safety precaution. Because what we want to do is we want to make sure that there is nothing left in that gun. And more importantly, we want to make sure we didn't forget step 1. Because what happens if I had this gun loaded, let's get it racked, one's in the chamber, okay? Now I've got this gun completely loaded, and I forget step 1, remove the magazine. I do step 2, rack the slide to eject one out of the chamber, right? Then I go to do step 3 and I go, oh, what's going on? Well, that lets me know that I missed step 1, remove the magazine from the weapon. So again, we just want to rack it 1, 2, 3 more times to ensure that nothing was in there. So we've removed the magazine, we racked it to ensure there was nothing in there, and then we racked it 3 more times. 1, 2, 3. Each time we want to make sure it's racked. So once that's done, we now need to go to lock the slide open. So to accomplish this, what we're going to do is we're going to move the slide back by getting our hand in a good racking position. I'm tilting it upside down so you can see. You would do it like this, but I'm tilting it over so you can see there's a little notch that my slide stop lever needs to move up into. So as I pull it back, you'll see my slide stop lever can now move up into that notch, and I ease forward with the slide. That locks the slide open. So that's step 4, lock the slide open. Step 5, we're going to look visual inspection. We're going to look down 2 planes. We're going to look down the magazine well in the chamber. We're going to look down the chamber and the barrel to ensure that there's nothing in there. So first I'm going to turn it, look down the magazine well, and see that there's nothing between the magazine well and the barrel, or excuse me, and the chamber. And then I want to peek down the back side to make sure there's nothing in the chamber or the barrel. Never, never, never point the gun at your face to look down the business end of the barrel. That's very dangerous. So we're going to look down the back side, and we're going to peek in there. We're going to make sure there's light coming all the way through so that we know there's nothing in the barrel or the chamber. A hint is that you can take it and point it at a light like so, and if you can easily see the light then coming through, it makes it really clear that there's nothing in that chamber or barrel. So we make sure that way, and then we do a physical inspection. Step 6, we take our little pinky and we're going to put it both down into the chamber and the barrel, and then down into the chamber and the magazine well, ensuring that there is nothing in there obstructing. So make sure all the rounds are now out. We can now call this administratively unloaded. Now, why do we go through all 6 steps? Because we want to ensure each time that there is nothing left in that weapon that is going to hurt us. So again, we're going to walk through those steps. We're going to, step 1, remove the magazine. Step 2, rack the slide to ensure that there's nothing in the chamber. We're then going to 1, 2, 3, rack the slide 3 times to ensure that we've remembered step 1, remove the magazine. Step 4, we're going to lock that slide to the rear. Step 5, we're going to do a visual inspection. Make sure there's nothing in there. Step 6, physical inspection to make sure there's nothing in there. Again, once we've completed all 6 steps, we can now call this weapon administratively unloaded. Why do we call it administratively unloaded? Well, remember the safe rules? Suppose all guns are always loaded, right? So this gun should be treated as loaded except for when we administratively unload it, because there are times when we have to unload it to perform certain functions in a safe manner, such as cleaning. So we have to have a way to get this in a state that is safe for us to operate it in for cleaning. So we call it administratively unloaded, not to be confused with just unloaded. What's the difference? Administratively unloaded means it's unloaded now that I've done all the 6 steps and I'm maintaining control of this weapon. But if I should put it down, walk away for a couple minutes, or put it in the safe, even if I leave it in this condition, I put it in my safe, I come back an hour later, get it out, what do I want to do? Treat this as a loaded weapon. So I would start the 6 unload steps all over again. Because if I've lost control of this weapon, excuse me, and because if I've lost control of this weapon, there's no way for me to ensure that nothing has gotten in there. So I would simply start the process over. Step 1, remove the magazine. Step 2, rack the slide to ensure there's nothing in the chamber. Step 3, rack the slide 3 more times. Step 4, lock the slide open. Step 5, do a visual inspection. Step 6, physical inspection. Now, as you can see, I wasn't going through that super fast. I was just going through it methodically. And what'd that take? About 15, 20 seconds? So hopefully you're not too busy so that 15 or 20 seconds is too much for you to do and take out to be safe. Remember, there is nothing that takes the place of safety. So now we've talked about loading a semi-automatic. Now let's say we've gone through the proper loading steps. I've loaded my magazine. I've inserted the magazine with a tap tug, and I've racked the slide to get one into the chamber. But now let's say I've had it in this condition, maybe in my safe for a little while, or I've gone to the range with it, and I want to be sure that when I go to shoot my first round, there's one in there, and I want to be absolutely positive there's one chambered. We can now do something called a press check. All a press check is a way to visually and physically inspect inside of the chamber to ensure that there is a round ready to go. So the way we do a press check is we're going to take our support hand and we're going to take the knuckle on our index finger of our support hand. We're going to kind of push it up here onto the rear sights, and then we're going to take our thumb and hook it under this back strap here. Notice I'm hooking this thumb under the back strap. And then we're just going to kind of do a pinching motion with our finger and thumb. So it'll kind of do like this. And with this motion, I can now visually see that there's a round in the chamber. I can also take my pinky and feel that there's a round in the chamber. For instance, if it was dark out and I wasn't positive, I could get that finger in there and feel it. So I now know there is one in the chamber. And then I can return it to its ready condition. Now this happened to go back. The spring is very good on this. So it happened to go right back for me. But sometimes when you do this, the spring doesn't get it back into battery, we call it, or fully seated with the slide. So what you'd want to do is after a press check, you'd want to give a little tap on the back of the slide to ensure that it was fully seated or in battery.